where my thoughts escaping, home, where my music's playing, home, where my love lies waiting silently for me.
This is Drew Brown, an attorney at the Greensboro Law Center. We represent over 1,000 North Carolinians who have gone to Virginia and South Carolina and taken out high-interest car title loans. We contend that these loans are illegal if they're given to North Carolina residents. They violate our usury statutes, and really the people of North Carolina are the victims. We've had success working some of the cases out, and if you hire us, you can do so on a contingency fee, which means you don't only have to pay us out of the money we get back for you. Give us a call, 336-478-6000. That's 478-6000, the Greensboro Law Center. Thank you.
Closer to my dream.
Good morning and welcome back to RealSavvy, WTOB listening audience in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and to the virtual audience everywhere. I have a great show, very appropriate, I think, for this week. My guest today is Joseph D. Felice, the former Region 4, am I correct? Region 3 Director of HUD, responsible for 5 states of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development during the Trump administration. Just job hunting right now. I figured he had a couple minutes that he might be able to come hang out with me. Joe and I have known each other for 10 years. I'm so excited to do this show just because, for 2 reasons. Number one, Joe and I have been connected on social media for the past 10 years. So I have watched everything that he's been doing, and you can't miss it because it's like, damn, he's traveling. I mean, where's he at today? West Virginia, all over the place, bouncing. Plus, and more importantly to me right now in this news cycle, is Joe and I actually were both political operatives 10 years ago. And we got locked up, not literally, not locked up like that, but locked into the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court building counting ballots. And that's, like, who would think it? But it's common ground, and that's how people meet, and that's the common ground. And plus, Joe, look, I'm gonna take you back. I'm gonna make you really remember how this conversation started, because we were at the same table counting, and I, started talking briefly about having lived in Philly. And the reason our bond was, you looked at me after I said I lived in Philly. You said, "Where's some good place to eat for lunch?" That's what you said. You trusted my judgment.
Because that's a problem in Harrisburg, right? It's gotten better. It's definitely gotten better. But 10 years ago, it was hard to find a good spot. So I needed the Philly guy to be able to tell me where to go eat.
Yes, sir. So what's up? But again, I want to go through and highlight some of your projects that you worked on, because you did a lot of good stuff with the Opportunity Zones.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of my background. So I was appointed by President Trump in May of 2017 to oversee the Mid-Atlantic region. That's Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and DC. Prior to coming to HUD, I'd both been politically active and active in community development. Politically active, I was the chairman of the Philadelphia Republican Party, but I also was heavily involved in a volunteer capacity in my community, which is Northeast Philly, which is Mayfair. So anywhere from, depending on the census, anywhere from 30 to 50,000 people. So it's a good sized neighborhood, a lot bigger than many of the cities that I traveled to. And I ran the Community Development Corporation there. So I had a lot, and the Civic Association. So I had a lot of experience on the urban development side of HUD, not so much on the housing. We had done some small time housing rehabs, single family rehabs while at the CDC, but I really needed to kind of bone up on the housing side of things. So when I first came on to the role, there's not normally a manual. And if there is, it's a lot of it's just words on paper, right? And I felt that for the best way for me to really understand this job and this role was to get out in the field. I had a saying that I used, and sometimes it angered the people in Washington, but I would always say a lot of times the people in Washington are on an island surrounded by reality, that you have a lot of people with really advanced degrees making a lot of policy decisions, but they never actually talk to the people at the ground level that are implementing these policies. So I thought it would be in my best interest to get around this region as much as possible. And when I would go, I would say, look, I'm not here to dictate to you from Washington how to do your job. I said, I'm here for you to dictate me to tell those guys in Washington how to do their jobs better, because they really need to have an understanding at a ground level. Look, I can't look at a city on a spreadsheet or on a map and determine that I know what's best for that city. The best way to figure that out was to go there. So I embarked on travels and trips, and I visited over 200 counties in 3 years. I hit 63 of Pennsylvania's 67 counties. We have field offices in Pittsburgh, Charleston, West Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, Wilmington, Delaware, and of course, Philadelphia. And HUD kind of covers a broad array of programs. A lot of times when people think of HUD, they automatically think of public housing. And that's definitely, one of our programs. We also have multifamily housing, which is apartments, but that are privately owned. They may have a HUD subsidy, they may not. There's also single family housing, people that need FHA mortgages. So they can't maybe qualify for a conventional mortgage. They need a little bit of assistance. They work with HUD to get an FHA lender to get them in a house at 3.5%. That portfolio, that's probably our biggest department when people don't think of. My office covered everything from Kentucky to Maine, 2,000 applications a day. So I look at that as kind of the housing side, the housing development side. Then we also had fair housing and equal opportunity to make sure that no one's violating people's, fair housing laws when renting properties and the like. And finally is the community planning and development. What's community planning and development? They're in charge of putting forth the community development block grant funding, as well as the continuum of care funding, which helps out with a lot of homelessness programs and getting people rapidly housed or working with Housing First. And then also that was the mechanism where the CARES Act funding came through to the city. So for example, Philadelphia would typically get $33 to $35 million in community development block grant funding, and the same in COC funding, but we get an additional $33 million for CARES Act funding. So whether that was renting out parts of a hotel for people that, for COVID and things like that, because it kind of hit everybody by storm. We also had secretarial initiatives that came under my purview, one of which was setting up what they call Envision Centers. Envision Centers were one-stop shops, most of the time with the housing authorities in cities where there was economic opportunity, educational advancement, character and leadership, and health and wellness, kind of all under one roof. We've gone more virtual model now, but the physical model, and was to bring in not only other federal agencies from EPA to HHS to GSA, and it's alphabet soup, right? I mean, none of these things meant anything to me when I first started, but they're all different federal agencies, but also bringing in nonprofit and foundational partners and for-profit partners into these communities to give people access to essentially move up and out of housing. Everything that I think this administration had done was, obviously we're providing affordable housing. We're working with our rental assistance demonstration, but was really to try to help move people up and out of housing. And one of the two biggest things that I worked on was Section 3, which you may not be familiar with, but what Section 3 does. Are you familiar with Section 3?
Not at all.
Okay. So I'm going to bring. So this is something that's very important that nobody knows about. So Section 3 is actually Section 3 of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. What Section 3 essentially says is if we're putting money into your community, 30% of the workforce should come from that community. Now, you and I both know that that's not the case. Being a Philadelphian, I can't even count on two hands the number of Jersey license plates I see at job sites where our funding's going. When meanwhile, people from the community who are ready, willing, and able to work aren't getting that opportunity.
Now, quick, not just to interject, since you mentioned that, how does union and Philly and union labor impact that Section 3?
It's important, and I actually spoke to Ryan Boyer with the Laborers International Union and the Philadelphia Building Trades about this. I mean, it affects it in several ways, because all of our projects are federally funded. There needs to be Davis-Bacon requirements, which means certain things need to be accomplished, certain prevailing wages need to be put forward. So one of the issues was to try to find a streamline through pre-apprenticeship programs to get more people from the communities we serve into those roles. Well, going forward, the way that this administration tweaked it, that's not going to be an option. It used to be that you could, they used to ask how many jobs you created, but people find a way around these things. So one of the things that we looked at was people, what I would call dustpan and brush jobs, where they give a guy a dustpan and brush, hire him for a day, hire somebody else for the next day, someone else for the next day. At the end of the week, they'll say, hey, we created 5 new jobs. Well, they're not getting any appreciable skills, and there's no sweat equity into this. So that we switched that from actual jobs to work hours. So they can't, people really couldn't mess with the numbers anymore. We were actually putting people to work, and this just got implemented in the last few months. So you're going to start seeing it kind of take off.
And
you
the
think
idea
that is, and
will
Chris,
that,
what's that?
will that sustain through the new administration?
It definitely should have passed through rulemaking and everything, unless they repeal it, which I highly doubt they will. And look, it's race and gender neutral. So it's not saying we need X amount of African Americans or X amount of women. It's like we're specifically targeting people that come from the communities that we are serving that sit below a certain poverty line. And the mindset is we also want sweat equity into the projects, right? If I'm building a brand new facility, let's say in North Philly, but all the workforce is coming from outside of North Philly, there's not going to be a ton of respect from North Philly for that project. But if people from that community are look, when I was with my CDC, we built a playground, a small playground, raised about $80,000 to build this playground. But what was more important wasn't the $80,000. It was the sweat equity from the community. Because when I say we built the playground, we were the ones shoveling the mulch, swinging the hammers, tightening the screws, so that if ever got vandalized, we all took that personally, right? So there's a level of not only potential job creation, and we don't want to talk about jobs either. This is about creating career opportunities. The District of Columbia has done an excellent job with Section 3, specifically in the solar panel installation business, whereas they realized this was a way to get public housing residents into a new field, and many of those people moved up and out of housing, which frees up the backlog. Because as you know, in many places, specifically on the Northeast corridor or the Eastern Seaboard, frankly, in the North Carolina, there are very many housing authorities that have not only waiting lists into the tens of thousands, they also have waiting lists that are closed. So our goal was we could work with our residents and essentially pay our residents to do the work on our projects. They would eventually move up and out of housing so that we could free up the backlog. So that's one thing that we go ahead.
And as you're doing that, you see reductions in crime and other social issues because you're hiring neighborhood people that needed employment.
Of course you do. And if people from the community are occupied and they're working on the project, or their dad's working on the project, or their mom's working on them, and these could be any project. These aren't just construction jobs, right? So this isn't just electricians and cement masons and carpenters. This could also be a social media manager. This could be a bookkeeper. This could be a landscape artist, things like that. So there's all different types of jobs to meet these requirements. And sometimes they're difficult. We took out some things. Professional service jobs had been in there, I think 7%. That was a little bit more difficult because when you're talking about lawyers and CPAs, it's pretty much hard to find lawyers and CPAs living below the poverty line. So, but we wanted to be more real about the work that was happening in those communities.
Home, where my thoughts escaping. Home, where my music's playing. Home, where my love lies waiting silently for me.
You talked about yesterday, actually, when we put this together kind of quickly, and I mentioned opportunity zones, and there was another program that you mentioned. If you recap that, I apologize if I meant, because I can't remember you were excited about. I actually remember that the playground you just mentioned. You posted about that all over Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, so I'm drawing you for a blank. Let's go to Baltimore though.
Okay.
In some of the projects with that project, I believe the Baltimore Times, that my article appears in, the owner Joy Bramble's son had a major project. I don't know if you remember. Does that sound familiar?
Not off the top of my head, but fill me in. I could talk about a lot of stuff that's going on in Baltimore.
Well, it was like the biggest opportunity zone project that you did in Baltimore. But again,
okay. So the biggest project that we did was the Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant. And what is that? So I look at Baltimore the way I looked at Philadelphia 20 some years ago, right? It's a town of the haves and the have-nots. there's not much of a middle class. It's either really rich or it's really poor. Many of the middle class have since moved to the suburbs. And let's face it, there's been turnover issues. I think we're on our fourth mayor in 5 years. So it's been hard to get politically stable. But there's a sense of pride in Baltimore, unlike anywhere I've ever really seen, that's kind of through the roof. So what we started realizing with this haves and the have-nots was you have all this activity around the Inner Harbor. And now Harbor East is burgeoning, right? You have your Whole Foods, you have your Starbucks, right? You have your brand new Marriott, and then you have it sitting next to Little Italy. But literally 1 block from Little Italy, you got Perkins Homes. It's 1,000 units, barrack style units from the 1940s, made out of brick, built to last. But just up the road from there, you have Johns Hopkins Medical Center. So I began to look at this as the hole in the donut, right? You have extreme wealth here, extreme wealth up here, and deep poverty in the middle. So we decided to do, and we didn't decide it, obviously, it was a competitive grant. There was a $30 million grant put into the Baltimore Housing Authority. Janet Abrahams is their executive director. She's doing an excellent job. She started a little bit after I started HUD, so we kind of came up together in Baltimore. She was from Newark. So, but what that did was that was going to remake the Perkins, Old Town, and Somerset neighborhoods to essentially bridge the divide between Hopkins and Harbor East. That $30 million created an additional 800 some odd million in private investment into that community. And it wasn't to keep people poor. The idea was to work with mixed income housing, which frankly, I see a ton of mixed income in DC, Northern Virginia, New York, and Boston, but nowhere else really in my region. So the idea was that if you can have really rich people living next to, poor people, and they begin to work with each other, they understand each other better, it just creates a much better community rather than essentially segregating out an entire population and keeping them poor, because the drug trade has always been pretty strong in Baltimore. On the flip side, on the west side of town, in West Baltimore, specifically Southwest Baltimore, we're dealing with a group called the Southwest Partnership, which is made up of about 6 CDCs and the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and the Biopark around Poe Homes. We gave them a $1.3 million planning grant for that community. Now, that community sits about 5 blocks west of Oriole Park at Camden Yards and about 7-8 blocks west of the Inner Harbor, yet there's still houses for $30,000, $20,000, $15,000 boarded up. I mean, in 20 years after the wire, you still have communities look the same. But what I'm seeing there is you have an entire partnership made up from the community up, working with your educational institutions, working with the city council person who's actually a Philly guy as well. He's West Catholic class in 1996. So same year as me, but West Philly. But you have your council person, you have the Biopark, you have the University of Maryland, you have the Housing Authority around the area, around Poe Homes, the city. And what we were able to do through discussions in the last year, we just had Lowe's Corporation, North Carolina, right outside of Charlotte. Lowe's Corporation is committed $2 million into that community for several issues. One is to help owner-occupiers fix up their homes, right? So old women and old men that have lived in these houses for generations that have not been able to keep up with them, to work with them to fix up their home, but also to work with local contractors to get them the skills and trades the skills they needed so they can apply for some of those Section 3 jobs down the line to really kind of come up to speed to work with those contractors to fix those homes, as well as having job training programs, potential jobs with the Lowe's team, as well as financial literacy and home ownership classes. So there's really been a community effort in Baltimore. And I mean, there's 16,000 vacant boarded homes in Baltimore. And when I used to speak to Mayor Pugh, at one time, Baltimore had 900,000 people. Now it has 600,000. And what she said to me was 300,000 people left the city of Baltimore and they didn't take their houses with them. And I was like, so that explains some of the backlog and the flight from that community. But I see so much promise there. Opportunity zones are huge. There's 40 some odd opportunity zones. Downtown Baltimore is an opportunity zone. And they're doing a really, really good job. I've worked with several opportunity zone developers that have some ideas to recreate certain sections of Baltimore, but keeping the affordability in, right? I mean, that's the mindset. And the best thing about having the city at the table is one thing I constantly hear. We had Scott Turner in, who was the executive director of the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council at 17 federal agencies and 3 regional partners in Philadelphia. And we brought in some state representatives, and some asked, what about gentrification issues? Our mindset is that you need to have people from the community at the table. How do you do that? They can set up their own opportunity zone fund. They can work with developers. So they're not just sitting idly by hoping a developer does the right thing. They're actively, genuinely engaged in the conversation.
I'm so happy to catch up with you. And you a Philly guy, because you can rattle all that stuff off. Anyway, what's next for you, Joe? Because you said you're probably bored about now after doing all that.
I am. Look, I love my job. Like I said to you, I visited 200 counties in 3 years. I mean, I went from North Philly to Tangier Island, Virginia, which is it's a funny little island in the middle of the Chesapeake where they still speak with a Welsh dialect, and they only got television like 10 years ago. Down to southwestern Virginia and southern West Virginia, driving down into the hollers, into the birthplace of country music museum, where I was like a fish out of water. They had a whole wing dedicated to a song I never heard, and the people were shocked that I never heard this song. Look, Chris, they literally were having a contest on who could change the tire on the NASCAR the fastest, right?
Yeah, I live right 10 miles from the border of Virginia, right in Mount Airy. So
you know what I'm talking about. So
yeah, I know right where you're talking about.
So this is down in Bristol. They actually had a booth where you could get a picture taken with a Dale Earnhardt Jr. lookalike. From a guy from Northeast Philly, this was a different world to me. And the thing I would say about my region is, outside of the desert, we had pretty much had everything. We had oceans, we had lakes, we had mountains, we had old steel towns, old industrial towns, we had farms, we had the South, right? I mean, Danville, Virginia, the last capital of the Confederacy. I mean, so we went from being like far Northeast Yankees to Southern. I mean, it was a really interesting way to do this job.
And I'm living that, because I'm from Stilton, as you may know, and I'm down here living in the country. So I'm adjusting myself, but I appreciate it. And you know what? Joe is real Philly. I mean, Joe, Eagles die hard, Sixers die hard, Flyers die hard. Joe's a mummer. So when you talk about being able to find common ground and appreciating Joe coming in, and, you know, those touch button issues, you know, Joe, I'm so happy that we could get here and not have issues. Good luck to you. Have they named you? Yes, sir.
No. I mean, look, that's what I am. But it's you know what? I'm from a Democrat city, right? So being a Republican from a Democrat city, I've had to work with Democrats my entire life. So when I went throughout this region, this was old hat to me. This was normal. I was dealing with Republicans. I was dealing with Democrats, because that's what I did. And Chris, you and I spoke yesterday. Let's not focus on the 80% that we disagree on. Let's figure out where that common ground is, and let's figure out how to make it work. And I think we all want to see, Republicans and Democrats want to see people up and out of poverty. And if there's a way to help people get up and out of poverty, I can't find anybody that would be against that. And if they are, they're a fool.
Yeah. Now, have you decided what your next move is yet?
So I'm looking. I'm having a lot of conversations. You know, I'm a lawyer by trade. I haven't practiced in a number of years, so I'm trying to figure out a way to kind of take what I did at HUD and still be helpful to people, while also you know, utilizing my law background. I taught American government at both Widener and LaSalle University, so I think I can bring an interesting perspective back into the universities, specifically working in the Trump administration, but working as a federal official, but also being a county chair of an urban party. I feel like, and I'd worked in state government, so I feel like I can bring, you know, federal, state, and local government, as well as really local neighborhood nonprofit. I feel like I can, you know, help educate some of our youth. And so that's something, just some things that are on the table. I'm not in any real hurry. I'm just trying to figure out what the next move is. I've had a life of service in different capacities. I'd like to continue that in some way.
I appreciate your time, Joe, and I'm going to definitely be keeping watch and hopefully have you back on. Thanks for making my audience real savvy.
No problem, Chris. Hey, thanks for having me, buddy. We'll talk soon.
You know how to help your clients find the home of their dreams, and we know the perfect mortgage can make that dream come true. We are Guarantee Rate Affinity, a joint partnership between the third largest retail mortgage lender and your company. We're here to help you look good to your clients and sell more homes. How? First, we make the process as simple, seamless, and awesome as possible. And that starts with our expert loan officers. You might have met some of them as they work alongside Coldwell Banker agents. Clients love our easy digital mortgage, which can have them ready to make an offer in minutes. We have over 100 loan products with some of the fastest turn times in the industry. And because our loan experts are fueled by the most advanced mortgage technology platform, we can help you and your clients at any time, from anywhere. Plus, you'll love tools like Loan Status Monitor that keeps you in the know, and Flash Close that shortens closings from hours to minutes. Above all, we're committed to the belief that your success is our success. So, when a buyer needs a mortgage referral, bring it home to the loan officers who work right alongside you to get dream homes closed. We are Guarantee Rate Affinity, and we are your mortgage company.